The beeping of the heart monitors fills the cold silence of the hospital room. Lying in the hospital bed, Officer Colton Rivers fights off exhaustion. His uniform is still stained with dust and sweat from the day that changed his life forever. Beside him, completely still, is Axel, his loyal K9 German Shepherd. His sharp eyes are locked onto his handler, watching every breath as if he knows how important this moment is. Dr. Evelyn Monroe checks Colton's vitals and exhales, crossing her arms. "You're lucky," she says softly but firmly. "If it weren't for him, you wouldn't be here right now." Colton weakly smiles, his trembling hand reaching for Axel's head, fingers brushing through his fur. "He's always been there for me, from day one." Axel rests his head on Colton's chest, feeling every heartbeat, the same heart he almost lost. The hospital is busy, filled with patients and medical staff rushing around. But for Axel, none of that matters. He refuses to leave Colton's side. He won't eat. He won't sleep anywhere else. No one can make him leave. Then late that night it happens. The heart monitor starts beeping erratically. Colton's heartbeat slows, and the medical team rushes in, alarms blaring. But Axel senses it before anyone else. His ears perk up, his body tenses. Then he jumps up, eyes wide, barking desperately. He nudges Colton's arm with his nose, whimpering, refusing to let go. And then something miraculous happens. Colton reacts. His fingers twitch. His eyes flutter open just slightly. With what little strength he has, he whispers just one word. "Axel!" The entire room goes silent. Dr. Monroe blinks. Stunned, the nurses freeze in shock. Axel doesn't just stay by his partner's side until the last moment. He brings him back. Days later, Colton is discharged from the hospital, still weak but alive. As he steps outside, Axel leaps up, tail wagging, barking with joy. Colton kneels down, wrapping his arms around his partner. "Thank you, buddy. I wouldn't have made it without you." Axel wags his tail, as if he knew all along this wasn't the end. Because AK-9 German Shepherd never abandons his partner. If the story moved you, imagine what comes next. Axel proved that the loyalty of a German Shepherd goes beyond what we can imagine. We're close to a huge milestone, 100K subscribers. If you love emotional stories of loyalty and courage, subscribe now and help us reach this goal. Don't miss the next episodes. Turn on the notifications and leave a like. The sun was just beginning to rise as Colton Rivers stepped out of hospital. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of the city waking up. But Colton wasn't focused on that. His eyes were on Axel, who sat obediently by his side, ears perked, watching his every move. The officer still felt weak. His body ached from the incident, from the surgeries, from the fight for his life. But as he reached down to scratch behind Axel's ears, he realized one thing. He wasn't alone. He never had been. "Let's go home, buddy," Colton muttered, his voice hoarse. Axel's tail wagged, but there was something different about him. He wasn't just excited. He was watchful, protective, as if he knew his handler wasn't fully recovered yet. As they arrived at Colton's house, a small suburban home just outside the city, Axel was the first to step in, sniffing the air cautiously. He had been trained to detect danger, and even now, back in the safety of their home, he remained on high alert. Colton dropped onto his couch, exhaling heavily. Axel didn't leave his side. Instead, he sat at his feet, staring at him intently. "You're not going to let me out of your sight, huh?" Colton chuckled. Axel blinked but didn't move. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, of an unbreakable bond forged in life-or-death moments. A dark memory returns. That night, sleep didn't come easy. The memory came back like a tidal wave. The gunfire, the chase, the moment Colton felt his body give out, the pain of hitting the pavement, the darkness that followed, and then there was Axel, barking, fighting, protecting. Colton shot up in bed, his breath ragged, his shirt drenched in sweat. He ran a shaky hand through his hair and looked down. Axel was there, wide awake, sitting by the bedside, staring at him. "You knew, didn't you?" Colton whispered. "You knew I wasn't okay." Axel let out a low whine and nudged Colton's hand with his nose. A lump formed in the officer's throat. How did a dog understand him better than most people ever could? The next morning, Colton was up early, moving slower than usual but determined. He poured some coffee, wincing at the stiffness in his body. Axel followed his every move. They were both off duty now. Colton on medical leave, Axel given time to rest after the traumatic event. But something in the shepherd's posture told Colton he wasn't content just sitting around. "You want to get back to work, don't you?" he asked, sipping his coffee. Axel's ears perked up. Colton smirked. "Yeah, me too." Just then, his phone buzzed with a text message from his lieutenant. "Need to see you at the station. Something you'll want to hear." Colton stared at the screen, then down at Axel. The shepherd was already standing by the door, tail still wagging, waiting for the next command. Something told him their story wasn't over yet. Colton gripped the steering wheel as he pulled into the station parking lot. His body still ached, but his mind was locked on the message. "Need to see you at the station. Something you'll want to hear." Beside him, Axel sat still, eyes scanning the lot, his body tense as if he sensed something was off. "I don't like this, buddy," Colton muttered. But Axel didn't flinch. He was waiting, always waiting. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and old paperwork. Officers glanced his way. He wasn't just another cop walking in. He was a guy who had barely survived. Lieutenant Holloway met him at the door, arms crossed. "You're lucky to be alive, Rivers. But luck won't keep you that way." He tossed a file onto the desk. Colton flipped it open, his chest tightening. A familiar face stared back at him. Logan Rains, a gang leader, a man Colton put away 3 years ago. A man who had just gotten out. Holloway's voice was low. "We intercepted some chatter. He's coming for you, and he knows about Axel." Colton clenched his jaw. They weren't just after him. They wanted his partner too. "We can put you in protective custody," Holloway offered. "Or you handle it your way." Colton glanced down. Axel sat beside him, still as stone. "We're not running," Colton said, his voice steady. Holloway smirked. "Didn't think so." He slid another file forward. "Then you'll need this." That night, Colton reinforced every lock in his house, checked every window twice. Axel followed closely, sniffing every corner, every doorway. The shepherd was on edge. He knew something was coming. When Colton finally sat on the couch, gun within reach, Axel lay by his feet, but his ears never relaxed. They weren't waiting for an attack. They were preparing for it. Outside, a car sat parked down the street, headlights off. A shadowy figure sat inside, watching the house unmoving. Axel suddenly raised his head, ears twitching. Colton followed his gaze toward the window, his instincts screaming. He moved slowly, gripping his gun. The shepherd let out a low growl. Someone was out there, watching, waiting. A slow knock echoed at the door. Not a visitor, a warning. Axel stood instantly, muscles tensed, ready to strike. Colton's pulse pounded, but he didn't hesitate. He raised his gun, stepping toward the door. If they wanted him, they were going to have to come and get him, and Axel would be waiting. Colton's grip tightened around his gun as he crept toward the door. Axel stood beside him, his frame rigid, ears locked forward, nostrils flaring. The knock had been deliberate, slow, calculated, meant to send a message. Through the peephole, nothing but darkness. His breath slowed, senses razor sharp. Every instinct screamed this wasn't a mistake. Someone was testing him, watching his reaction, waiting. A second knock came, softer, almost mocking. Colton's pulse hammered in his ears, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he signaled to Axel, whose muscles remained coiled like a loaded spring. Then footsteps, slow, measured, fading into night. Whoever it was hadn't come to break in. Not yet. They wanted him to know they were there. This wasn't an attack. It was a warning. A game. Colton exhaled sharply, stepping away from the door, but his mind stayed locked on high alert. His phone buzzed. "Lieutenant Holloway, we intercepted more chatter. You and Axel are being watched. Stay sharp." As if he needed the reminder. Axel had already stationed himself by the window, eyes locked on the street like an unmovable sentry. He saw things before anyone else, and he didn't like what he saw. Minutes turned into hours, but the tension never faded. Axel didn't rest. He didn't lay down. He sat at the door, ears twitching at every distant sound. His breathing steady, measured. Outside, the street was too quiet, a manufactured quiet. Colton had been in enough dangerous situations to recognize it. The silence before something bad. He leaned his head back, closed his eyes for just a second, exhaustion pressing down. Then movement. Fast. Close. Axel snapped upright, his growl deep and guttural. Colton's body reacted before his mind did. Gun raised. Heart hammering. Through the window, a shadow darted between parked cars. Quick but precise. His stomach twisted. They weren't just watching anymore. They were closing in. His breath came slow and controlled. Instincts taking over. This was it. No more waiting. No more games. Colton glanced at Axel. His hand tightened around the weapon. Axel was already at the door, his stance unshaken, his muscles locked. No hesitation. No fear. Only readiness. Colton swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. You ready, partner? Axel didn't move. He didn't need to. His eyes said everything. They were in this together, and no one was making it out without a fight. The air inside the house felt heavier, charged with tension. Axel stood near the door, his stance unwavering, eyes locked on the window. Colton barely moved, his grip firm around the gun. Outside, the shadow moved again, this time slower, more deliberate. Someone was testing their patience, waiting for the right moment. But Colton wasn't about to give them the upper hand. The soft crunch of gravel sent a jolt through his system. Axel's ears twitched. His low growl vibrated through the quiet. Colton moved to the window, careful to stay in the shadows. His sharp eyes scanned the street, heart pounding against his ribs. Then he saw it, a second figure hidden in the darkness, creeping along the fence line. It wasn't just one person. They weren't alone. Colton exhaled slowly, forcing himself to think. He wasn't cornered. Not yet. Axel was still, but every fiber of his body screamed readiness. The shepherd's nose flared, tracking every movement outside. Whoever was out there, they didn't realize one thing. Axel had already marked them. They wouldn't make a move without him knowing, and that would be their first mistake. A sudden metallic clank shattered the silence. The backyard gate. Someone had touched it. Axel reacted instantly, his growl shifting into something darker, something primal. Colton steadied his breathing. They were making their move. He clicked the safety off his gun. No more waiting. If they want to fight, they were about to get one. The porch creaked. The door handle jiggled. Axel's body tensed, his muscles ready to explode forward. Colton raised the gun, his finger hovering over the trigger. His voice was low, calm. Come any closer, and I swear you won't make it back. Silence. Then slow, deliberate footsteps retreating. Whoever it was, they weren't expecting resistance. Not like this. Colton didn't move, keeping his sights locked on the door. Axel remained beside him, eyes burning with intensity. They weren't safe, not yet. This wasn't over. It was only beginning. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think will happen next? Will Colton and Axel manage to drive the intruders away? Or is this just the beginning of something bigger? Drop your comment below and share your theories. Colton didn't lower his weapon. His heartbeat thudded in his ears, but his grip was steady. Axel remained still, ears forward, body coiled like a spring, ready to snap. Outside, the footsteps faded, but Colton knew better than to assume it was over. This was just the first move. The silence felt too controlled, too intentional. Whoever was out there wasn't retreating. They were circling. A low growl rumbled deep in Axel's chest. His gaze locked onto the back door. Colton moved carefully, keeping to the shadows, stepping lightly as he approached the rear window. He parted the curtain just enough to see outside. Then he saw it, a flicker of movement near the fence. Someone crouched low, their silhouette barely visible in the dim streetlights. But they weren't alone. Another figure moved along the tree line. Colton's breath came slow and controlled. Two of them, maybe more. They weren't amateurs. They were coordinated, patient. He had seen this kind of movement before. Professionals, they weren't here to intimidate. They were here to act. His stomach tightened. Axel had sensed it first. And if they thought they could outmaneuver a trained canine, they were about to learn how wrong they were. The back gate creaked, a barely audible sound, but enough to send Axel into motion. His muscles tensed, his instinct screaming that the moment had come. Colton exhaled slowly, finger resting on the trigger. He had two options: wait for them to strike or take control. He glanced at Axel. The shepherd's eyes met his, sharp and unwavering. They didn't need words. It was time to move. Colton moved first. He threw the back door open, stepping onto the porch with his weapon raised. "Freeze," he commanded. His voice cut through the night like a blade. Axel exploded forward, a streak of muscle and instinct. A snarl ripped from his throat as he locked onto the nearest target. The figure stumbled back, caught off guard. Their cover was blown. A second man cursed, stepping from the shadows, reaching for something, a gun. Colton didn't hesitate. One shot, center mass. The man crumpled instantly, his weapon clattering onto the pavement. The second figure tried to run, but Axel was faster. His powerful legs launched him forward, his teeth finding the man's arm in a bone-crushing grip. A scream cut through the night as Colton moved in, kicking the gun away. Axel held firm, growling, ensuring there was no escape. The hunt was over. The man's scream echoed through the night as Axel's teeth sank deeper into his arm. His body twisted in a desperate attempt to break free, but there was no escaping the iron grip of a trained canine. Colton moved fast, his gun remaining trained on the man. His eyes flicked between the downed suspect and the second body lying motionless just feet away. The night air smelled of gunpowder and sweat. He could hear the distant wail of sirens. Backup was finally on the way, but he wasn't about to let his guard down. Not yet. "Call him off." The man gasped, his voice tight with pain, breath coming in short, panicked bursts. His legs kicked out weakly, but Axel didn't flinch. His grip was firm, his growl low and menacing, vibrating through his entire frame. He wasn't letting go until Colton gave the order. Colton took a step closer, pressing his boot against the man's chest, forcing him still. "Who sent you?" His voice was calm, but his finger hovered dangerously close to the trigger. "Tell me now, or you'll be explaining it to the medics. If you're lucky." The man's breath hitched. His eyes darted around, searching for an out. There was none. The pain in his arm was making him dizzy, and the weight of Axel's powerful body against him only made it worse. It was... He choked on his words, then hissed through clenched teeth. "Logan Rains. He put out a contract on you." Colton's jaw tightened. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill through his veins. This wasn't just revenge. This was an execution order. Rains wanted him gone for good. The sirens grew louder, flashing red and blue, cutting through the night. Axel stayed locked in place until Colton finally gave the command. "Release." Instantly, the shepherd obeyed, stepping back, though his eyes never left the man. Blood dripped from his fangs, his chest rising and falling steadily, a soldier waiting for the next order. The first squad car screeched to a stop, officers spilling out, weapons drawn. Lieutenant Holloway was the first to approach, his sharp gaze sweeping over the scene. "Hell of a night, Rivers," he muttered, holstering his weapon as he surveyed the two suspects. One dead, one barely conscious. His eyes landed on Axel, who stood tall, unwavering. "I see your partner handle business." "Yeah." Colton exhaled, finally lowering his gun. His heart was still hammering, adrenaline coursing through his veins. But this isn't over. He turned back to the injured man on the ground. "Rains won't stop. And now that he knows we're not easy targets, he'll come at us even harder." Holloway gave a slow nod. "Then we make the first move." Colton looked down at Axel, who stood beside him, steady as ever. "What do you say, partner?" Axel's ears perked, his tail giving a single flick. He was ready, always. The flashing red and blue lights bathed the street in an eerie glow, but Colton Rivers barely noticed. His heartbeat was still hammering in his ears, his grip flexing around his gun, muscles taut with the residual tension of the ambush. Axel stood beside him, his frame unmoving, ears pricked forward. His focused stare never left the man bleeding on the pavement. The shepherd's breath came slow and steady, a predator waiting for the next move. Lieutenant Holloway crouched beside the suspect, his fingers tightening around the man's collar, yanking him upright just enough to make his injuries protest. The guy let out a pained grunt, but Holloway didn't loosen his grip. "Start talking," he ordered, his voice a deadly mix of authority and impatience. "Or I swear to God I'll let Rivers' partner here have another round with you." His head jerked toward Axel, who bared his fangs slightly. The deep rumble in his chest was enough to make the man flinch. "I told you already." The man gasped, his breath shallow, his body trembling. Sweat glistened under the streetlights. His unfocused gaze flickered between Colton, Holloway, and the K-9, who stood like a soldier awaiting his next order. "It was Rains," he blurted out. "He put out a contract on you." He sucked in a sharp breath, his wounded arm useless at his side. It was supposed to happen tonight. Colton didn't react. He had learned long ago how to control his emotions under pressure, how to read between the lines. This wasn't just revenge. This was a premeditated execution. The difference sent a slow burn through his veins. Rains hadn't just wanted him out of the way. He had sent professionals to finish the job. "Where is he?" Colton asked, his voice controlled, lethal. The man hesitated. Holloway's grip tightened, his face hardening. "You really want to play games right now?" His voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "Look at him." He jerked his head toward Axel, whose sharp amber eyes burned into the man like fire. "You think he's going to stop if I tell him to go again?" The shepherd let out another low growl, stepping forward just enough to make the man squirm. The suspect caved. His body sagged, his breath coming in quick, panicked gasps. "Pier 17, he choked out, his voice breaking under the pressure. "An old shipping warehouse on the east side. That's where he's been moving shipments, regrouping his guys." His chest heaved. "I swear to God, that's all I know." Colton exchanged a glance with Holloway. Pier 17, it made sense. The docks were outside the usual patrol routes, just far enough in the city to operate unnoticed. A perfect hiding spot. If they moved fast, they might be able to catch Rains before he disappeared again. Holloway exhaled sharply, nodding toward the officers behind him. "Take him in and get an unmarked unit on that warehouse. Quiet and low profile. We don't want to spook Rains before we make our move." The suspect was dragged away, his curses fading into background as the officers secured the scene. Colton turned back to Axel, running his hand down the shepherd's back, feeling the solid muscle beneath his fur. His partner had saved his life again tonight, but the job wasn't finished. Not even close. He exhaled, adjusting his grip on his weapon. "Looks like we got work to do, buddy." Axel didn't need a command. His tail flicked once. His piercing gaze locked on the road ahead, as if he already knew the real fight was just beginning. The black SUV moved through the empty streets, headlights dimmed, cutting through the thick mist rolling in from the docks. Colton Rivers sat in the passenger seat, gripping his gun tightly, his jaw clenched. Axel was in the back, his breath steady, but his sharp eyes never stopped scanning. He knew they were heading into danger. He always knew. Lieutenant Holloway drove in silence, his hands firm on the wheel. "Unmarked units are in position," he muttered, keeping his eyes on the road. "No movement at the warehouse, but that doesn't mean it's empty." He exhaled sharply. "We go in quiet. We go in smart. No screw-ups." Colton barely nodded. His thoughts were locked on Logan Rains, the man who had sent killers after him, the man who wanted him dead. Rains had always been a step ahead, but not tonight. Tonight, they were taking the fight to him. The warehouse loomed in the distance, a massive skeleton of rusted steel and shattered windows. Shadows stretched along the cracked pavement. It was a perfect place for an ambush. The SUV rolled to a silent stop. Axel was already alert, ears forward, his entire body tense with anticipation. Colton checked his weapon. "Stay close," he murmured, reaching back to tap Axel's vest lightly. The shepherd's tail didn't move. He was locked in, focused, ready to strike. The perfect soldier. Holloway signaled to the team. Officers moved in, weapons raised, keeping to the shadows. Colton followed, his pulse steady, but his mind racing. The air smelled of salt and oil. The scent of decaying would thick around them. Something felt off. Too quiet, too still. They reached the side entrance. Colton presses back against the cold steel wall. He held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. The door creaked open. Axel was the first to move inside, his paws silent against the concrete. The warehouse stretched into darkness. Crates stacked high. Dim lights flickered overhead. Colton stepped in after him, gun raised. No sign of movement, but he could feel it. Someone was here, watching, waiting. A sudden sound, metal scraping. A shadow moved, then gunfire. Colton barely had time to react before bullets tore through the silence. He dove behind a crate, his back slamming into the wood. Axel was already moving, weaving between cover, staying low, his body a blur of muscle and precision. The officers returned fire, flashes of light illuminating the darkness. "We were waiting for us," Holloway shouted, pressing against a pillar. His radio crackled with orders. Colton gritted his teeth. Of course, Raines knew they were coming. This wasn't a raid. It was a trap. A door slammed in the distance. Footsteps running. Colton's heart lurched. Raines was escaping. "Axel, go!" Colton commanded. The shepherd bolted forward, his powerful legs launching him over debris as he chased the fleeing figure. Colton pushed off the crate, moving fast, dodging bullets. His entire focus was locked on the only thing that mattered now, stopping Raines. Colton sprinted to the maze of crates, his boots pounding against the cold concrete. Axel was ahead, weaving through the shadows like a phantom, his muscles rippling with raw power. The scent of Logan Raines was fresh. He was close, too close to escape. Gunfire erupted behind them. Holloway and his team were still locked in a firefight, but Colton had only one target now. He barely heard the chaos behind him as he pushed forward, following Axel, who never hesitated, never slowed. The shepherd had locked onto his prey. A metal door slammed ahead. Colton's breath came in hard bursts as he reached the loading dock. A figure moved in the dim light. Raines. He was already climbing into a black sedan, one hand gripping the open door, the other clutching a pistol. His escape was seconds away. "Axel, take him down." Colton roared. The shepherd launched like a missile, his body stretching midair before crashing into Raines with bone-crushing force. The gun clattered to the pavement as the gangster howled, Axel's teeth burying deep into his forearm. Raines fell back against the car, his body twisting in agony. Colton closed the distance in an instant. He grabbed Raines by the collar, slamming him against the vehicle, shoving his gun under the man's chin. "Call it off." His voice was ice. "Tell your men to stand down." Blood dripped from Raines' arm, his breathing ragged. His eyes flickered between Colton and Axel, still growling, ready to rip deeper. "They won't stop," Raines hissed, his lips curling into a twisted grin. "Not after tonight." Colton didn't blink. Wrong answer. He yanked Raines forward and slammed him against the car again. "Call off." A radio crackled in Raines' pocket. The man hesitated, his jaw drawn tight. But the fire in Colton's eyes told him there was no way out, not this time. With a shaky hand, he lifted the radio. "Stand down," he choked out, his voice weak now. Silence. Then the gunfire stopped. Holloway's voice cut through the radio seconds later. "Warehouse secure. Suspect surrendering." It was over. Colton exhaled, stepping back. Axel kept his teeth locked a moment longer before finally releasing Raines. The man collapsed to his knees, clutching his mangled arm, his face pale with pain. Colton holstered his weapon, turning to Axel, who stood tall, chest heaving, watching their enemy with unwavering focus. "You did good, partner," Colton muttered, scratching the shepherd's head. Axel's tail flicked once, his job complete. The sound of sirens filled the air as backup arrived. Holloway jogged up, surveying the scene before nodding at Colton. "Hell of a night." Colton smirked. "Yeah, but at least we finished it." Holloway exhaled, glancing at Axel, who sat beside his handler, his piercing eyes still locked on Reigns. Damn dogs got more guts than half the force. Colton gave Axel a firm pat. That's because he's more than just a dog. He met Holloway's gaze. He's my partner. And as the city lights flashed against the dark sky, Colton knew one thing for sure. No matter what came next, he and Axel would always be ready. Did you enjoy this thrilling story? Then don't leave without hitting the like button. It helps us bring more amazing stories like this one. If you love stories of bravery and loyalty like Axel and Colton's, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next videos. Now tell me in the comments, what would you do in Colton's place? Would you trust your life to a partner like Axel? Let's talk. Share this video with someone who loves action-packed stories and incredible dogs.